your name, are you cool with me using Kim or did you want to use a pseudonym?
I've thought about this a lot. I think I'm just going to be fine with using because that's part of what I'm trying to get to is just being me and having people take me as I am for
Yep.
good or ill.
Yes. Okay. I love that. I
So I
love that.
think I'm just going to take the risk and
Okay.
yeah.
You're listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. At the SMP, we embrace the Stoic principle of the obstacle is the way, or that we can take the hardest things in our lives and use them as a way to learn and grow into the best versions of ourselves. If you're here, you're likely a growth-oriented parent of a young person who's adopted a trans identity. I'm Stoic Mom, a life coach and educator who is also a growth-oriented parent of an adult trans-identified daughter. The conversation you're about to listen to is part of a special series in which I talk with other moms determined to find healthy ways of navigating gender ideology in their homes. Moms whose stories and strategies may inspire you. I hope you find value and wisdom from my conversation with this Stoic Mama. I mean, first off, I wanted to tell you that I was excited to see your name when I come in on the forums. That was really fun for me. And I'm curious what inspired you to fill it out.
Um, I guess I felt like I was ready, if that makes sense,
Mm,
to sort of. I've been meaning for a very long time. I could even probably at this point say years, to start writing and being more public with writing, and I haven't managed to um, put myself out with writing. Like I don't know, there's something about I don't know why they find this less intimidating, but there's something about writing
mm,
that it's sort of permanent. People can see it and critique it in a very specific editorial way. And so I think part of it was feeling like I was ready to try to say into the world how I'm feeling without the
mm,
pressure of writing it down,
hmm.
to take a step to being a
To
little
take
more
a
public.
step. Okay. A little more public. Okay. Yeah. Um, Maybe for the listeners, you could let them know, there's a question on the form about how this presents in your family and how long you've been dealing with it.
So trying to think because it's been a long time now. Um,
Hmm.
I guess it was probably the fall of 2019 when it first sort of hit our family.
Okay.
Um, and that was when my daughter came home and announced at dinner um, that we'd been misgendering her all meal, although she had never said anything to us about anything at that point. So we were like, we don't understand what is happening, what this
Hmm.
term is, what is going on. How can we have been doing something wrong when we were never told, anything? Um, and then it kind of ebbed and flowed. So that's, I mean, what we're 24 now, so that's 5 years. Um, and she is now 20 and living on her own, far away, with our blessing. She didn't, you know, um, but uh, our relationship in that time has gone through a lot of change, as everyone's relationship with their parents and their children go through between the ages of 15 and 20, right? It's been
Hmm.
a journey between trying to figure out what is going on,
Hmm.
how to deal with that in a child with a fair few issues, um, and then the change as your child becomes an adult, goes out and lives their life, and letting go of the control's the wrong word, but the I guess regulation that parents do for their on behalf of their kids as their thing, to
Hmm.
letting the child be in charge of their life and taking ownership. And how do you how do you set that up? How do you make your child
Hmm.
aware that you've done that? You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
how both internally, how do you do that? And so it's been a journey. It's an ongoing journey. Um, and I
And not
guess
just with her, is that right? Like you've got several
Yeah,
other
well, I've
children.
had to come figure out how I feel about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
What is my opinion about it? What is my belief system surrounding this? And then figure out how do I have a relationship, an adult to adult relationship with my child,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, given that her beliefs and my beliefs are pretty fundamentally different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about your family configuration and how this has impacted the rest of the
So I have
family?
4 kids, and
Mm-hmm.
my trans identifying kid is my third.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my oldest is a very, very, very strong trans ally to the
Mm-hmm.
point at which she is more estranged from us than her younger sister is based on this,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, which I find fascinating and frustrating. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have 2 boys in between them. So my second and my youngest, who are not as estranged, and have been working through their own journeys with this and how to relate to their both of their sisters on this, and me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's kind of a, what was it? Um, I can't remember his name now, but the person who writes the books about estranged, where he talks about it being a grenade that you drop in a family.
Is
Um,
that Joshua Coleman? Is that
maybe, maybe.
okay?
And that strikes me as very true. And so, sort of how my sons are dealing with the fallout of that, of how,
Uh-huh.
do we take sides? Do we not? Like, because their belief systems, again, differ potentially from mine, although I don't think it's far. Um, and and my second is autistic. What would have been called Asperger's, but isn't now. So it always. I have a friend whose daughter is severely autistic, and so I always feel a little guilty saying he's
Mm,
autistic, like they belong in the same category, which they don't.
mm-hmm.
But Asperger's isn't really a term we use anymore.
Right.
Um, but that it means that some of this has been fraught for him too. When his sister sort of dropped the ROGD bomb on us, it was very hard for him. Very black and white thinking, especially back then when he was 17. Very black and
Mm,
white, very hard for him to understand, And so he kind of, his way of coping with it was just to tell himself he was wrong,
mm,
which breaks my
mm,
heart a little. And so
mm,
then when I come along and say, no, I actually think you were right and your questions were fine, it enrages him in this way of like, well, why wasn't anyone there helping me then? And I've worked so hard to convince myself, effectively the earth is flat. How dare you come to me now and say it's okay to think it's
mm.
round, right? And so that, he and I are still working through that too. Um, so yeah, and my kids all live far away. I should say, my oldest lives in Canada. My second lives a half an hour away, but my third, my trans-identified kid, lives in the UK, where her dad's family is, and then my youngest is going to Denmark next year as an exchange student. So I have a
Yes.
very spread out family, which
Mm-hmm.
also impacts the dynamic of trying to figure out how to manage these relationships as they evolve and let people know that they're changing, and figuring that out with that much distance, which just creates less opportunities to practice.
To practice. Okay. Yeah. Um, I think that you ran a pretty tight ship is how I've interpreted your parenting style with your kids growing up. You've described them as high needs, if I might share that. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. And so, do you think that that presented its own set of difficulties as they have been transitioning from childhood into adulthood for you, as far as
Yes,
renegotiating those relationships?
yes. And my husband and I have talked about that. I think that, particularly with me, because I was stay-at-home mom and my husband traveled a lot for work and was, absent in some ways. I think that with certain of my kids, I was very enmeshed. Um,
Mhm.
and so some of what we're going through, I think, is individuation on sort of like in the same way that we were very enmeshed as a result of moving a lot and having all these issues, the individuation is also fierce.
That's a good word. Fierce.
And
Okay.
that's hard for me to cope with because, as the mom, I'm like, oh my God, I sacrificed so much and I did so much for
hmm
you, And so the idea that my payback is this really fierce, harsh, sometimes cruel
hmm
individuation
hmm
is hard. Um, but at the same time, probably very necessary. Um, and yeah, so that it definitely adds a layer, because it also means that I have to step back from that too. I have to be able to recognize when it's too much, and like I have an idealized, view of what I would like with relationship I would like with my adult children that involves a lot of contact, and I in my head I'm like, oh, we just switch into this adult where we talk to each other, and I think for my kids it's not that simple, because I wonder if having me in their life just on a surface level like that, um, they feel too much pressure, right? They feel more than I feel like I'm putting out,
Oh
more than I'm
yeah.
even intending to put out, because there's
Uh-huh.
just this history of
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
enmeshedness where I was making a lot of decisions for them and I was helping with a lot of things. And
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts there. I do get the sense that we tend to evade expectations a lot of the time. And so that's kind of what I hear when you say that maybe there's some of that in there, that um, they recognize those expectations that were set when they were young. And so now as young adults, they might be trying to move away, I think, from those expectations. You use the word enmesh, and I do want to touch on that a little bit. I think that a lot of the families that find themselves at the Stoic Mom Project, there's some element to the childhood where there was more required, maybe, of the
Mhm.
parent, right? Based on things like Asperger's, or, neurodiversity, or there's been a variety of ways that that has presented in the families that at least make their way here, that I think requires just more on the part of the parent. And I think that that might be contributing to that sense of enmeshment, which then in
Well,
turn
there's,
leads to, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's definitely, so there's my son who had a
hmm
lot of emotional dysregulation growing up. And now as an adult, he is just a marvelous, amazing,
hmm
I would say very regulated emotionally person.
hmm
But it was a rough road sort of getting him there. And well, I shouldn't say we didn't get him there. He grew up. Like some of it was just
hmm
waiting it out. But the
hmm
school systems, various things are not really geared up to kids who struggle with that. And so that was just hard on everybody. And then we moved a lot, long distances. So, and we lived far from family. So we were a very insular family. We kind of had ourselves to rely on. So I think
hmm
that creates a certain amount. There's
hmm
not a lot of other adults that my kids had who were like, oh, well, I'll just go stay with them. And they're like my parents, but not, we didn't really have that for
Okay.
them.
Uh-huh.
And my third, the one who's trans identified, had a chronic health condition as a kid that required an IEP and also a severe nut allergy, which resulted in multiple ambulance rides to emergency rooms. Like that was sort of a standard thing that we went through in our kids' childhood. And so that meant that there was a lot for me, like the start of every school year, there's new schools, there's appointments with nurses to discuss the IEP, how they handle that at the school, make sure they're trained on EpiPen use, make sure all the teachers are aware. There was a lot of things going on with all the way from the beginning of school parties, like she can't eat what's there. Do I contact the teacher? Do I bring in special snack? Which
hmm
creates a divide between her and the rest of the class, even if there's no bad intent. It just, you're
hmm
not part of the party in the same way. All of that meant that there was a heavy reliance, I think, on me to be this buffer
Mm-hmm.
really important. And we worked really hard to have her be in charge of her allergies and to have her be in charge of her things. Um, and she's amazing and she's been really good. But that creates this funky dynamic
Mm-hmm.
of checking in more than say I would with my youngest who can just go to things and I'm like, hey, go see you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not waiting for a call. I don't feel like I can't go to the gym without getting an Apple Watch so that I can be in the gym and still receive calls because the schools would call me. And sometimes the calls were like, hey, your kid's going to the hospital in an ambulance.
Right.
Would you like to
Right.
meet them at the ED? Right. And so that creates this dynamic that even I think the process of trying not to create the enmesh dynamic
Mm-hmm.
creates an enmesh dynamic. Like it's almost
Mm-hmm.
impossible to avoid. And it creates a very
Mm-hmm.
different um, and I'm not sure that, well, I don't know. I was going to say I'm not sure we handled it well, but I'm not sure if anyone handles, I think it's sort of luck of the draw, maybe of adult personality and kid personality and the specific circumstances, but it's just hard. It's a hard thing to, um,
It's a lot, right?
yeah,
It's a lot. It's extra.
yeah.
You had to do extra.
And
And
I
I
don't
do
think the
think,
kids see it. To them, it was
hmm
normal childhood. I mean, kids see
right.
that's just normal. So to them, our whatever over the topness was just over the topness. Like, their friends' parents weren't like us, or.
hmm
So I
hmm
think, it will be a long time probably before they really appreciate, if they ever do, what it was like to parent kids who have extra needs.
hmm hmm It'll be a long time if they ever do. I think that's a bit of a shift for you since I've known you.
Yeah, I
That
think I
to
was waiting.
recognize that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I was waiting that, oh, they'll get it. Like someday they'll get it. I'll be appreciated. And I think I've mostly let that go. Um, you know,
hmm
I will have to
hmm
be, and I still have waves of, um, I was about to say self pity, but I think that's too strong. But waves of like, oh, it's so unfair. It's
Oh
so,
yeah.
just so sad that this, but, then I pull myself back up again.
Well, you bring up a really important understanding there, that awareness that it's not fair. Life's not fair. I think that somewhere along the line, we get the impression that it is or is supposed to be, but the truth is it's just not,
Yeah.
and that we can do everything right as parents. That does not guarantee that relationship is going to look the way we'd like it to look when they
Yeah.
are individuating and becoming adults. Yeah, that there are other factors that we cannot control.
Yeah. And it's interesting the age that my kids are. So 24 to 17. So graduated from college, not in college, not in college, high school graduate, just, starting off. Um, Talking to, I have all these friends, and I hung out with one of my mother's really good friends this summer who's in her early 80s, and talking to them, these people in their 70s and 80s, about, their kids are all my age. And talking to them is very soothing and different. So she sort of said, she's known me since, when did I start babysitting for kids? When I was like 13, 14. Her kids are now in their 40s. And she said to me, she was like, just remember the two things she said to me, where she has a 4-year-old granddaughter. She's like, never thought I would have grandkids. So just never say never. I have this amazing, she lives next door to her granddaughter. Like she has this amazing life now. She's like, never thought that would happen. And here I am. And she was like, and I also in my 20s did not speak to my parents for 5 years, lived in the same town and lived in the same town and did not speak to them for 5 years. And she's like, but in the course of my, huge life, including a very long time with her parents alive, it was a drop, you know? So in that
Yeah.
5 years felt all encompassing, but like many 5-year periods in life, it was not, she's like, just remember that. And I sort of said, well, what if I don't get invited to weddings? And she was like, you might not,
Mm,
but that doesn't mean that you won't ever, right? That you
right.
won't come to the other side. And it's just very helpful, I think, to have friendships with people at that stage of life, we're that much farther
Yes.
along to say, this is, you don't know what's coming. It
Yes.
might be that, it might not be. You have to
Right.
adjust as if it is, but you also can't close your mind to it. Um, and that's in contrast to friends I have my age, whose kids are my age, who are still in the throes of somewhat competition, like, where's your kid going to college? Where's your kid going? Is your kid not going to
Hmm.
college? Or what are they doing? Do they have a job? Have they graduated? Are they working? Are they working in their field? You know, all this stuff. And there's still this idea, I think, floating around that it's all that the kids that are doing well are going to do well forever, which my
Hmm.
friends in their 70s, 80s are like, that's not true. and, and also that it's all down to parenting. So if your kid is really
Hmm.
struggling, you clearly did something wrong. And if
Hmm.
the kid is doing great, that's clearly all you. It's not luck on part of the kid, circumstances, whatever. And again, my
Right.
friends in their 70s and 80s are like, well, that's crazy. So, you know, because they've known kids who were doing great and then whoo, fell off a cliff or
Hmm.
whatever. And so
Hmm.
it's been, I have to remind myself when I find myself too much in one world or too much
Hmm.
to take the step back and be like, this, I can't predict the future and I can't control the present. So I have to find a way to live with whatever future comes and
Mm.
be in the present, not be overridden
Mm.
by it. And that's hard.
It is hard. It's hard to not time travel.
Yes. And it's
Yeah.
hard to not, when I'm having a, when something has gone wrong, like when something has tipped off one of my kids and they're really mad at me, um, it's hard not to wonder if I should be doing everything differently, even now.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned a few things that you've had to let go of, right? You've had to let go of that need for appreciation from your kids. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you've had to let go of expectations of what your relationships would look like right now. You've had to let go of certainty, right? That's the wisdom I hear. Well, in comparison, you know, in in your relationships with older people who have that wisdom, you know, and can share that. Would you say there are other things you've had to let go of? I feel like that is just such a big part of moving through this is
Well, I think something I'm
letting
still
go.
working on letting go of is guilt. You know,
Mm,
letting go of the idea, well, and shame too, I guess, probably too. But the
mhm,
idea that I had control, that I either
mhm,
created this or created the mess or had some kind of control. Um, yeah. And I still will fall into, oh, well, I must be a terrible parent. Like if my kids are having this relationship with me, it must be because I was so incompetent or something that they're that upset at me. And I have to let that go because even if it's true, there's nothing I can do. I
mhm.
can't I can't go back and fix it. So whether it's true or not is kind of irrelevant. What matters is whether I'm doing what I can well now.
Yeah,
So I'm not saying
yeah.
it's irrelevant like total forgiveness or whatever, but I'm saying it's not, I can't change it and I can't retroactively fix it. And I can't even in the present fix something I did in the past. All I can do is try to go forward in the best way I can. And that is also very, I think I'm still letting that go, still letting go of any sense of control over what I did in the past, that I have to let that go.
So letting go of control. Yes, and then the feelings associated with thinking that you might have caused this somehow.
Right. But I have that responsibility. Like, yes, I'm the parent, and yes,
Yeah.
the parent has to be the parent. But at the same time, I'm a person,
Yes. Yep.
right? And so I
Yep.
can't do everything right all the time. And I had four kids, three of whom had pretty intense needs. And I can't be the perfect parent for all of them all the time.
Right.
Sometimes what was required for one kid was diametrically opposed to what was needed for the other kid. Like literally to be the good parent for child A, I had to be a terrible parent to child B. Like, because their needs were not
Mm-hmm.
always compatible. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, it's not like I made a choice, like I like child A better, but like in the moment, child
Mm-hmm.
A needs this and is having a crisis. So child
Mm-hmm.
B needs to sit with this not working out for them. Or it could be a thing where, you know, like as an example that I give a lot because it's simple and I don't think it upsets any of my kids to have this in the public. But my oldest has misophonia and just, chewing, people sniffing just drove her nuts as a kid. And my
Mm-hmm.
younger son, like many boys do, developed tics.
Mm.
And one of his tics was sniffing, and one of his tics was like popping his lips. I don't know. I can't do it. And it drove her insane. And we went to doctors because we were like, maybe he has issues with his nose, which it turns out he did, but he also had this tic. And the doctors were like, it's not physical. There's nothing in him. He doesn't have Tourette's, but it's a common thing in boys. And the really the best thing you can do about it is ignore it because it's
Mm.
often exacerbated by stress. So the more you point it out, the more they're aware of it, the more they do it. So really the best thing you can do is just, you know, well, trying to tell a 10-year-old or 11-year-old that what she really needs to do is ignore that her brother is driving her up the wall is virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And all her impression, or at least she told us at the time, was that we were picking him over her or we were ignoring her
Mm-hmm.
needs. And,
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't get through to her, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are
Mm-hmm.
things like that that are, in other ways that are bigger that, like your kids aren't compatible with each other. There's nothing that says you're going to have kids whose special needs will be met in a way that also is pleasant for their siblings.
Well, though, isn't that life as well?
Right.
We're gonna be in the company of people that we're air quotes incompatible with, people who irritate us,
Yeah,
and being able to tolerate that is a life skill that they're gonna need to have.
sure. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that she forgives me, her mom,
Right.
for making her learn
Right.
that life skill. Right.
Yes,
So,
yes, yes.
you know, yeah. And so I think like some of that, like, and that's like an easy small example that I have pretty much forgiven myself for. But there's other ones that are less simple.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes I look back and I think, well, should we have spent the money there or should we put it somewhere else? Or should we have done that or should we have done that for the other kid? Like where did we make the right choice in prioritizing this over that? And um, but I can't change it. So I
Right.
really I'm still struggling to learn to let go of what I am responsible for and what happened that my kids on some level have to take responsibility for
Mm-hmm.
learning from going forward. Like, yeah, maybe I
Mm-hmm.
could have done it better, but sort of like you were saying, we have to learn to cope with people we don't like, right? Like, you don't have
Mm-hmm.
a coworker who eats really noisily at his desk every day, and you just have to deal with that. That, some of these lessons, like, yeah, maybe I could have done better and maybe I should have done better. But on the other hand, they're still responsible for learning the lesson, whether it was pleasantly learned or unpleasantly learned.
Mm-hmm.
They still have to take that forward. I can't be responsible for whether they learned it or not, or whether they're angry about how it came about.
I'm excited to share that this episode of Conversations Along the Way is sponsored by Dream School, which is brought to you by the same three psychoanalysts who bring you the podcast This Jungian Life. For those who may not know, Lisa Marciano, author of the book Motherhood and one of the founders of Therapy First, is one of the co-hosts of This Jungian Life. The This Jungian Life podcast inspired me to start paying attention to the symbolism and meaning in my dreams. As a result, around my daughter's 18th birthday, I had a series of dreams that brought me much comfort and peace around trusting both her journey and the foundation we have provided her. I continued to spend time pondering my dreams and researching the symbols that appeared, and basically just hoped that I was, air quotes, doing it right. I finally gave myself the gift of Dream School and can confidently say it's inspired huge transformation in my life. It quickly deepened my appreciation for the wisdom my dreams offer me and increased my drive to learn more about Jungian philosophy and how I can use it to strengthen my coaching skill set. So not only do you learn how to, as they say, decode the language of metaphor and symbol, you'll learn quite a bit about Jung's ideas around human development over the lifespan, including his concept of individuation, a process that we're all invited to do in midlife that, well, adds more life to the rest of our lives. I could go on and on about the value of consciously engaging in our own midlife individuation process, but I'll save that for my post on the Stoic Mom Project and my work in helping clients navigate their own unique individuation journeys. If you're interested in Dream School and what it might inspire in you, you can use the code STOICMOM15 at checkout for 15% off of Dream School tuition. That's Stoic Mom in all caps, followed by the digits 15. And now back to the conversation. And you also said something really important when you said, I'm human. As parents, we are all human. And I don't think any of us get through raising our children without some regrets, and some that reflecting and thinking about the things we might have done differently. But the truth is, nobody gets a perfect childhood. That's not that's not reasonable. Um, and yes, they've got their own curriculum, if you will, that they have got to move through. And some of that is going to come out of their childhood. A lot of it is. And that's just kind of human development. It's how it works. I think culturally, there's a lot of pressure on parents to do it perfectly. Like you said, that in this generation, what's happening is people are comparing and and taking credit when their kids are doing well, and usually like hiding in shame when the kid maybe in this moment is not doing great. But as your wise older friends know, it changes. We're all going to
Well,
be dealing with, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, and also what's doing great is changes, right? So
Yes,
I have a
exactly.
friend whose son, same age as my oldest, and he dropped out of college during COVID because college during COVID was miserable. And he was already working as a line cook somewhere in his college town. And he's fallen in love with that, the
hmm
restaurant business. And he now is a sous chef at a really nice place. And he has paid leave and paid vacation
hmm
and healthcare. And he's on his way to a career in the restaurant industry, which is not the easiest industry, but he is solid.
It works for
And
him.
well, yeah. And, who knows? I mean, chefs do fine. And,
hmm
like it's not,
hmm
and it's interesting sort of watching the evolution of that because when he first dropped out, I went, oh, college dropout, right?
hmm
But then there's this path, and so there's and it's interesting to talk to people about my daughter that's living in the UK because she did not want to go to college. It was not for her, so we encouraged her to get a job, and she decided to go to the UK, which is fine. She has a passport, so she's British. And it's interesting because when she was a senior in high school and people would ask like, oh, where's she going next year? And I would say she was working, they'd kind of be like, whoa. But now when I say that I have a just 20-year-old who has been working for 2 years and, was thinking about getting another job, but now kind of has a career path and's kind of figured out what she wants to do. And she's like career wise moving through this stuff and figuring herself out. They're like, you know,
Well,
because
for the
their
audience,
20-year-olds
that
are
was a drop
still
jaw.
asking for
Yes.
money every month and figuring
Yep.
out how to cook and
hmm hmm
and so it's these things of like, well, what is success in that age? It's
hmm hmm
so, I mean, we certainly in my socioeconomic group where we're all supposed to like do well in high school, go to college, get a job, whatever. Deviating from that path in any way, it's like parents are terrified.
hmm hmm
And so
hmm
being a parent that's let your kid do that. I mean, so many people have disbelieved me and us when we've been like, we're okay with it, including our kid, with just like with other adults encouraging her to be like, yeah, don't believe your parents when they say that they're okay with it. They can't be. And we're
Mm.
like, but we are. Like, we want you to have a plan, but if you have a plan and you have a job and you're supporting yourself, we're like, okay. And so many people have been surprised that we're like that and expressed to her, to our detriment, I think,
Mm.
disbelief that,
hmm
we must
hmm
be just giving lip service to that idea that we're actually cool with it.
Would you say that was another thing you had to let go? Like for me, I think that came pretty easily because I I tend to lean that way anyway, without the rigid ideas of what the path needs to look like.
I think that I let go of her going to college pretty easily in the sense of like I didn't need her to like go and get a degree and be this educated person. I had a little bit harder time letting go of the pathway through college because I just didn't know how to launch a kid without it. I didn't know what the
Mm-hmm.
pathway was to how do you get them out of your house and have them supporting themselves and do like college is such a soft launch in a lot of ways and it was the only one I knew. Um
Mm-hmm.
and so I was okay. Like, I think I let go of her going to college when she was in like seventh grade and was clearly not a student. It was not her thing. And she was like, I don't want to go to college. And I was like, okay, but that doesn't mean you get to sit in our house and play video games and do nothing, right? Like, you have
Right.
to, like,
Mm-hmm.
because it felt a little bit when she first announced it that it was a, I don't want to do homework. I don't want to do school. So therefore, if I say I don't want to go to college, that absolves me of having to get decent grades. And I was kind of like, well, high school grades are about more than going to college. They're also about showing like future employers that you are willing to do tedious tasks that you don't want to do and do them anyway. Um, and so I think the college part, but once actually I give credit to my mother-in-law who is a lifelong teacher. She was like, there's apprentice programs in the UK and you
Mm-hmm.
can sign up as an apprentice. And so once we sort of had a thing that we could latch onto, which in the end she didn't do, she went straight into work, but once we had this thing to latch onto of like, here's an alternative to school that will launch you, we were just very comfortable, I think. And then when she started latching onto that and looked at the various options, she did come up with a plan. By the time she was a junior, she was thinking about post high school and what her plan was. And so I think on some level, it was easy for us to let go in the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
It was harder to figure out how to navigate conversations with my peers
Okay.
about what she was doing because that always felt a little bit like, oh, what did you do wrong that your kid's smoking? You
Yeah.
know?
I guess, I myself didn't finish college until my late 30s. And so maybe that makes it a little,
Well, I
I,
have
d- I,
relatives, like
mm,
I'm the least educated in my immediate family.
hmm
Like my husband has a
okay.
PhD, my brother's an MD PhD, my sister has two masters, my mother has a master's, my dad has a PhD, and I'm just here
Right.
with the little BA, and that's all. I did graduate school, but I didn't even finish my master's. Right, I dropped out of graduate school, so I'm like the lowest. But then I have these relatives that my aunt got her undergraduate degree in her late 30s. And basically, she was doing extension classes because she just liked them here and there.
Hmm.
And one day,
Hmm.
one of her professors was like, you're two classes away from a BA. And she was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, right. And then I have an uncle who wanted to be a rock star, like literally, like
Mm.
that's what he did. He smoked a lot of pot and played a lot of guitar all around. And when he was in his 30s, was like, well, I'm not going to make it as a rock star. And I want a life. And he went back to school and was a middle school math teacher for 30 years. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't think his middle school math students would have ever guessed, like, if you were like, hey, your math teacher used to be a pot smoking guitar player who wanted to be, they would have been like, what? He's my math teacher. Right. So I have these examples and I have really good friends who took years to grad. So like, I knew I wasn't worried about her and my daughter ending up in a terrible place, but
Right. It's
I
the
there was a
navigating.
navigating with peers who are still
Uh-huh.
in the, oh, well, my kid is going to Brown or whatever.
Right.
It's
Yes.
kind of like, where's
Yes.
your kid going? Well, she's not
Yes.
going to college. And that was and even when they were admiring the shock of like, your high school graduate is just working and paying for themselves. And like,
Hmm.
it was just so that I think was the bigger hurdle, I guess, was figuring out how to carry the courage of my convictions
There you go.
in
Yes.
her out into the wider world, which I think I'm still doing with my kids. Like I'm trying to figure out how to carry the courage of my convictions with this trans stuff
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
them without compromising my beliefs in reality, but also allowing them to do what they want to do. Like, I'm not very good at that, apparently. I have very firm beliefs in like what I think is okay and not okay, but sharing that in public is apparently a struggle.
Which is kind of your main goal right now, right? Like that seems to be what you're working on. In the forum, there's like a checklist of uh, I say strategies that align with the Stoic approach supported by the SMP. And so when people are filling out the interest form and mamas are filling it out, they're checking which of these that they feel they've applied. You checked all of them,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is great.
I feel like I've been working on a lot. Like I was looking, I'm like, yeah, I've been trying to do that. Yeah, I've been trying to do that. Yeah.
Among them, modeling healthy behavior, letting go. We've talked a lot about letting go of control, surrendering to something larger than yourself, which I think you have some story around as well. Um, Exercising curiosity and compassion, focusing on developing inner peace, and practicing non-attachment, which I think applies to what you're speaking about. But I wanted to jump ahead to the what else has worked for you, because that's what you're touching on now, I think, is this desire to show up authentically in the world and have your children's response to that not inhibit you from showing up that way. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll invite you to expand on that.
Um, well, I think this is kind of a one step forward, two step, like, or two steps forward,
Of
one step
course,
back kind of
because
thing,
we're
right?
human. Yes.
And and so like there've been baby steps of like giving books, sharing ideas with people in the wider world that this is a thing, but I don't agree with it. So like, some of the little things that I've sort of got down pat are like I will say my daughter and I will say she, her, and people will ask, um, especially sort of in my faith community, because I don't think that she did this on purpose, but her name is a very boy name in that community. And so, I mean, she picked it as her boy name, but I don't think she realized, you know, and so people will ask, they'll be like, did you name your daughter that?
Hmm.
And I'll be like, no, no,
Mm.
no. She identifies as male. I use she, her pronouns. I still refer to her as my daughter. You can do whatever you want. If you feel
Mm.
uncomfortable with the fact that I'm doing that, you're welcome to use he, him pronouns for my daughter. You're welcome to refer, like, you don't know her in any way, but you're under no obligation to follow me down this path that some people find very offensive. But that's where I am.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then if people ask me more, I have more to say, and I've been probably less successful than I would like to be, but I've been trying to get it down to like an elevator pitch of like, this is where I am. This is the thing. This, whatever. And I'm happy to give more information if people want to ask, but I don't want to get into a giant. I try really hard to be like, this is where I am, and this is what I believe, and you can do whatever you want. Because I know that some people, and then, and I'm trying to get better about that. Um, so that when people ask, they can do that. And then with my kids, I've been practicing. So like with the boys, I've been practicing like my one son, the youngest, you could see he was uncomfortable. Like he didn't know whether he needed to use she, her pronouns with me, but then he, him pronouns with his sister, like that he refers to as his brother. Like it was just, he was very fraught because he knows that she gets incredibly angry. In
Hmm.
theory, I have permission to she, her, her, which she gave me
Okay.
and has not rescinded to my face, but has told other people that she only agreed to it under duress. Because I've heard this from other people, they've told me. And I'm like, well, that's something she needs to come to me because I'm going to continue doing this because she told me it was okay. And when she tells me it's not okay, I'll stop. But I'm not going to stop because there's a whisper network. That's
Mm.
up to her. But as I said to my son, I was like, you do not need to do that. And you don't need to conform to what I'm doing. Just because I'm using she, her, you can use he, him to me. I know who you're talking about. And he
Hmm.
was just like, oh,
Mm.
right. Like
Hmm.
you, like, because she would get very mad if she found out. Whereas I'm not going to get mad. I'm not,
Right.
I'm trying to make it very clear to other people. I will not get angry if you use whatever pronouns you want for other people. I'm going to, my shtick right now, I guess, is I want to control what comes out of my mouth.
Hmm.
And I
Mhm.
believe very strongly that you should control what comes out of your mouth. So it should be
Mhm.
in no way influenced by what I think or what comes out of my mouth, because that's my mouth. And what you
Mhm.
think and what you want to say is for you to decide. And so I've been trying that with my sons. And that, like I said, with my young one son, he was just like, it was just instant relief. You could see he was just like, oh, this is so much easier than I thought. Um, my older son and I had a pretty big discussion where he was like, isn't it offensive to, why is it, if it's so important to them, why do you need to flout it? And I was like, well, it's actually really important to me. He was
Mhm.
like, well, but then shouldn't that make you respect that they want this? And I was like, but also shouldn't that it's so important to me make them realize that they need to that they should respect my level? Like if it's equally important to both of us,
Mhm.
who decides who takes precedent? In my opinion, that's a point at which we agree to disagree and we each do our thing and we go, okay, you do this and it really annoys me, and you do this and it really annoys me. We're going to kind of let that go and ignore it because there's so many other things that are worthwhile in this relationship. And so I'm
Mhm.
trying really hard to model that and do that. And when I get pushback, sometimes I handle it well and sometimes I handle it well. So that was um, like one of the things, because I was looking for my responses and it was like exercising curiosity and compassion, and I had a big fail on that this past week.
Oh.
My daughter pushed back really hard, and it was a perfect opportunity if I had been able to stay calmer and be like, well, why is this bothering you so much? And I didn't.
Well, and so this is where the power of reflection comes in, right? Because now you're on the other side of that and you can kind of see, oh, I might have handled that differently.
Yeah,
But again, you're human. And there's a lot of power in that reflection, I think. You know.
yeah,
Yeah. So what was this with the trans-identified daughter?
yeah. So I made the mistake. So I was traveling for a week with two
Hmm.
friends, and two very very good friends, and we were dropping. One of them has two kids who were getting dropped off for graduate school, and we were helping them move in. And they're both trans identified, and she has a very different way of dealing with them than I do. Some of that comes from the fact that they both came to their trans identification toward the end of or after college, so they were basically adults. So it's a very
Hmm.
different dynamic, I think, if an adult kid comes to you than if you have a 15-year-old, right? It just sets up a
Hmm.
different thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And um, part of the dynamic that was problematic for me and my daughter when we were first navigating this was that she had a pattern of self-harm, and it was very unclear to me that she
Hmm.
wasn't using or planning to use some of the accoutrements of transition as a method of self-harm, an
Hmm. Hmm.
acceptable method of self-harm. And it was very hard for me to tease that out, and she was very angry that I was, but she kind of was. So that's a very different dynamic than my friend has with her kid, and she doesn't want to talk to me about it. And it's a place where she's just said I can't talk to you about it, and that's fine. So we haven't. But it did come up on this trip, partially because, as I said to her in the same vein of what I'm saying to you, I'm trying to be more, and I said we have very different paths. Your path with your kids started at a different age. It was a different path. Your kids don't have this history of of self harm and trauma. Well, they do have a history of trauma, but it's very different than my kids. All of that is very different. So I sort of said we have very different paths, and my
Hmm.
fears and your fears are very different. And as my kid gets older, I'm letting go of that more because she's an adult and she gets to make her own mistakes. So if
Hmm.
she decides to, at this point, if she decides to take testosterone and likes it, great. If she decides to take testosterone and doesn't like it, on her, not me. That wasn't
Hmm.
true when she was 15 or 16 or 17, right? That's a different thing. And so we talked a little bit about that, about how we have different paths and different kids, and we're coming in.
Hmm.
And so it felt fine.
Hmm.
And my kids all have slightly unusual names, including the new name that my third kid has picked. And so when you go to like, gift shops and there's all the name things, it was never
Hmm.
an option for any of my children because like their names aren't unusual, like where you'd go, oh, weird, but they're never in those things.
Hmm.
You never buy a keychain or a cup or whatever. For whatever reason, my third child's name has started appearing. And so
Birth
we were going
name
to,
or
her
chosen
birth name,
name?
her chosen, her
Birth name.
given name. That's what I've started
Okay.
saying. Given name and chosen name. Because dead name just
Given name. Yeah,
irritates
same.
me. But I'm like,
Agree.
given
Yeah.
name, chosen name. Those both sound very
Mm-hmm.
respectful to me. One was given to you, one
Mm-hmm.
was chosen.
Mm-hmm.
So I've started using given name and chosen name. So her given name has suddenly become like
Mm-hmm.
popular, but it's places. So one of my friends was like, "Oh, hey, look, here's this kid's cup with her given name on it, and it had a unicorn." And I was like, "Well, that's hilarious, right? Because that's so her, and yet I can't give it to her." And my friends
Mm.
were both, including the one with trans identifications, was like, "Oh, well, you should just buy it. She'll get a kick of it." I was like, "I don't think she'll get a kick of it." And they were like, "Oh no, you totally should." I was like, like, I really don't. But I was like, okay, compromise between what they're telling me to do and kind of what I know. I'll send a picture of it to her and be like, how hilarious is this? I looked for chosen name, sibling name one,
Mm-hmm.
sibling name two, sibling name three, and none of them were here. This is the only one, and it's a unicorn. How, and it was almost sold out. So it's like that popular, right? Like, how is that? And she did not take it well.
Oh,
She
okay.
got very angry and said this whole thing where she was like, these are boundaries in you. And I was like, okay, I feel like I can't talk about your childhood because like I don't know when this is gonna. And she was like, no, you can talk about nostalgic things from my childhood. Just you can't use my given name to refer to me. And that ended up being her rule. She's like, my rule is don't use my given name to refer to me. But she used dead name. And I was like, and I've gone back and read the thing. I'm like, I never referred to you by it. That was
Mm-hmm.
what I was showing you. I even listed your chosen name as the first alternate name I looked for. Like I
Mm-hmm.
looked for
Mm-hmm.
all the names of people I could buy this for. And the only name that is associated with our family at all is this one that I can't use. Like that's what I was saying. She was
Okay.
very, very angry. And I took it very badly. Like that would have been, that's what I'm saying. It would have been
Oh,
an opportunity to say, why does this bother you so much? What is triggering you about this? Because I'm not referring to you. So why is it so hard for you to have this name even in memory? Um, but I didn't. I like immediately just got, you know, I
okay.
felt accused of something I hadn't done, called
Mm-hmm.
the name, which I don't do. And it brought up the conversation I'd had with my son earlier, where he was like, "Why can't you let go?" And I'm like, "I've already conceded on the name, which is a big deal to a parent. Like we pick
Yeah.
those names. It's not
Mm-hmm.
nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
if names are so important, why is there no recognition that they're important for parents too?" And he's like, "Well, but you should be able to. Names are unimportant." I'm like, "Okay, if names are unimportant." Then it shouldn't be a big deal if I mess up. And he was like, no, no. I'm like, what I hear everybody saying is names are really important to me and they should be irrelevant to you. And I can't accept that. They're either important or they're not. But you can't be like, it is only important to me and you have to treat it as unimportant. That is just so unfair to anyone in either direction that I just can't
Yeah.
accept that. And I said, and I've conceded on the name. So why can't there be concession back on like pronouns or whatever? And he was struggling. Like we talked about it a bunch. And so that was sort of fresh in my mind of like, wow, I've conceded on these things and I can't even like in reference to a period of time when it was your name. I can't even joke about it that there's this cup I can't buy. Right. And yeah. So I handled it okay. Didn't handle as well as I wish I could have for me. I think I handled it
Okay.
as far as for her.
Because what I'm hearing is you communicated authentically. You
Yeah,
know,
and
the
that was
place it was
fine. But
coming
then
from was a lighthearted place. And yeah, you were experimenting a little. You were testing something.
and
You
I
got good information in that
yeah, and I
interaction.
it stayed calm and I said,
Mm.
it's going to take us a while to figure this out, but we'll get there. Like I think objectively I handled it fine. But for me, I'm like I could have done better and for whatever reason it set me into a spiral of like
Okay.
it
Yeah.
set me
So there was
back.
this inner experience that felt
Yes,
like,
it set
okay.
me back internally a lot. And I think
Mm.
I'm now it's been 4 or 5 days and I'm through it. But it took coming home and being in my house and like settling back into my routines like I have noticed that it required being sort of back to being tethered in my
Interesting.
space to sort of,
Yeah.
it was like somehow at the end of this trip, which was a
Uh-huh.
great trip and really fun, but at the,
Uh-huh.
where we were tired and we'd done a lot and it was, outside of that, like I couldn't handle that, in that I needed to be in my office with
So
my
good
friends.
information there too. You're learning
Yes.
more about yourself through this experience. And isn't that kind of the beauty of this orientation of, what is the information in this for me? Rather than judging it as backsliding even,
Yeah,
there's there's always stuff to learn,
that's a
you
good way
know.
to look at it. That it
Mhm.
wasn't backsliding. It was another
Opportunity.
it was another bit of information.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, that's kind of on the list too. How did I word that? Making meaning of this experience, and we could say making meaning of any experience as an invitation to your own growth, and I guess with that question in mind, I'm curious how you would answer the question of, how has this evolved you? I was using changed, but I
Um,
really want us to focus on how this is helping us to grow and be more authentic, right, in the world.
I think it's made me realize more how much of what, well, so I guess two things. So one, it's important to have a grounding, to know what you believe and where you stand. It's important. It's like the old thing I remember in English back in college or high school, where you have to learn all the grammar rules before you can start breaking them, because you can't break them effectively until you know what you're saying by the breaking. If you're just writing
Mm-hmm.
willy-nilly because you don't know that you're supposed to write that, it just comes across as
Messy.
confusing, potentially
Mm-hmm.
irritant. So you have to know where you really strongly know what you believe and where you stand in order to know where you can concede.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. So some real clarity on your values.
right. So
Mm-hmm.
that then when you're conceding, you are letting a concession go, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like, am I changing my, like, and then other people
Mm.
come to you and say, well, you did this. And you can say, yeah, that was a concession to you. That wasn't a change. Like, so it really helps to know, to really think about where you stand and what you believe, and why. Um, and then I've also been learning that it's what we do for other people sort of makes us, but not in a sacrificial way, which I think is how I thought of it before, that like I've
Mm.
sacrificed for people, therefore I deserve something in return.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah,
not
say
it.
more. Mm-hmm.
But that by doing for other people, we sort of lift ourselves. So you don't, like with our kids, it's different because the obligation there when they're little, especially if they
Mm-hmm.
have extra needs or whatever, it's like you can't say no, right? You have to be there, you have to be in it, and that can be exhausting and hard, and you don't get a break.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're in our life and we're not raising kids, we can say yes or no to driving someone to a doctor's appointment or making a meal or volunteering to do something, or conceding something that is something we don't believe in, but in this instance we're conceding to you because that's a gift we're giving to you. That all of those things are not sacrifices that we make to get something back. Like, we literally get back by doing it. There's
Mm-hmm.
no extra reward. The reward is in the
Mm-hmm.
doing for the other person, and that life is much more fulfilled and contented, for me anyway, but I think this is more universal than just me, when we are doing for other people, but not because we expect something back. We're doing
Yes.
it for them because we just want to do it. That is the thing. I feel like I don't know how to articulate it well
I think
without
you did
falling
a
back on cliche.
beautiful job of articulating it.
But
I think
that, I
that
think, is
was,
a big evolution for me. Is Yeah. And so then all these other things fall into place, all these old etiquette things of like writing thank you notes, right? Is not a chore. Oh, I gotta write a thank you note. It's
uh-huh.
it's a gift that we give to the person who gave us something, that we give a little piece of ourselves that we hand wrote, right? It's not a thank you note. It's a, here's a little piece of myself that I, and time
Oh,
that I'm taking
yes.
for you because you're
Yes.
special to me.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. That is a reorientation to an internal locus of control that gives you access to your agency, that because now you're not driven by the responses you're getting from other people, but from this very grounded, solid
right,
place of who you are in the world and what brings you those feel goods. I like to call them the eudaimonic feel goods rather than the just the hedonic pleasures of,
right,
indulging our senses. These are the things that are meaningful for you, and you're doing them for that reason,
right.
not for what you're getting back. And that's huge. That gives you access to inner peace. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have situations that throw us into these emotional states that we
Right.
need to work through, and learn from. But it's a very different way, I think, of being in the world. Yeah.
Well, and it makes a lot of things less, well, so like using the thank you note, it makes them less of a burden
Yeah.
to
It's a
do
completely different
because,
relationship, isn't it, to
right.
it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, a lot of those things. And this is where then I like, it's as I evolve, this is like, it's a constant circle, right? As I
Yeah.
evolve these things, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I teach this to my kids when they were growing up? How come I didn't model this? No wonder they don't do these things. And then I think, okay, but you can't do that, right? Like,
It's kind of cruel,
like this
isn't it, that we
constant
figure this
thing, like,
out
right? And then I'm like, no,
after they
no,
moved it.
can't feel guilt about that, that I didn't teach them that because I didn't figure it out till
That's
much
right.
later. So like all I can do is show it now, right?
Well, and I think that is its own has its own beauty, right? I think that if you develop that capacity, that does somehow make it easier for the next generation to develop that same capacity when it's their time,
Right.
and it could be decades down the road, likely will be, you know. I just almost wonder if it's just part of, again, that human um, development, and this is the stage in which that happens
I know it's like
is
this
through
is why
life.
it's always older women who send thank you notes. No, but like it is, there are things like this that I'm like, oh, this is what grandmas do. Oh, this is why grandmas do. Right? Like there was, I
Yes.
babysat last night for our neighbors because they helped out a lot. And so we were like, how do we pay them back? And I was like, they have an 18-month-old. We give them free babysitting. That's what we do. Because we're
Yeah.
trustworthy, right? We're parents. And so they were like, oh, okay. And I ended up, the 18-month-old was asleep the whole time. But their friends that they went out to dinner with had a 3 and a 5-year-old. So I got to hang out with them. And they were a blast. They were a blast. And it was so much fun. I had so much fun. And I was sitting there thinking about it because I was like, I babysat all through high school and that's how I paid for everything. And it was, I earned money and that was great. And I was competent and everything. But I was like thinking, like, as I was like, when I was 16-year-old babysitter, I would have been like, oh my God, go to bed so I can have some time to read my book and
Yep.
watch.
I
Like, I
know.
do not want to be hanging out with you. Like, you're cute and all, but whereas I was like, let's hang out. You want to watch it?
Yep.
Oh, let's do that. Tell me about that show. And like, drawing pictures. And I was like, this is a whole different world to come to
Mm-hmm.
these little kids and see them post parenting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like they're just
Mm-hmm.
endlessly fascinating. And I have so much patience because I'm not responsible for them. And I
Right.
understand on a really deep level that they are very good at code switching. So they will be able, like, I can let them play with something. Like I had yarn with me because I was going to knit if they fell asleep. And they were like, ooh, can we play with the yarn balls? And I was like, sure. And like at
Mm-hmm.
one point, the 5-year-old kicked it and it all fell apart. And he was like, okay. And I was like, it's okay. I just get to reball it. You made the ball? Yeah, I'll just reball it. And they were like, let me help you untangle it. And they were like, let me help you untangle it. And again, I was like, okay, because I don't care. Like I have time. I get to come home and untangle it later, or I can untangle it there. I'm not training them to
Uh-huh.
be like he was playing with my Kindle and he was like, the page changed. I'm like, yeah, because you turned the page. So he's like, my mom doesn't let me do this. I was like, no, because that would have made me insane. If I was your mom, I would have had to teach you
Mm.
not to play with my Kindle. But I'm a random person. So you can play with my Kindle. go for it. It was so liberating and so much fun
Mm,
to hang out with them. I was like, this is the joy of grandkids. And this is what
hmm
comes from having
hmm
been through this, is this
Yes.
knowledge and this relaxedness and this chill. Like,
Yes.
yeah, it was great. It was so much
It's all
fun.
that letting go, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
gift in that. Yeah. Well, this has been so delightful. As we're wrapping up, I'm curious, what do you hope other parents will take away from this conversation?
Um, I think mostly, um, well, I guess that you're not alone.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
sometimes we get caught up, and I hope I'm not being very egotistical in saying this. Sometimes we get caught up in thinking we're the only person that's feeling this and
Mhm.
whatever. And we're not. Like lots of us feel like failures. I think especially with our kids in this age range.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so you're not alone. And um, it's I think one of the things I was scared of when I started this journey was that if I let go of these things,
Mhm.
that somehow I would be letting go of being able to show my kids that I love them, or letting go of the depth of relationship. And some of that is true. Like I definitely we're in a phase, which is hopefully temporary, of me not hearing from them very much, me not seeing them very much. Like the individuation process is real,
Mhm.
but it's not that I have let them go,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? I'm letting something else go. I'm letting my sense of responsibility for them go and letting them be responsible for themselves, which then is freeing to being able to get to know them as adults. And the pain of that
Mhm.
is whether they will realize
Mhm.
that I am doing that or have done that. But that's their growth, right?
Mhm.
Hopefully, we will all live long enough for them to realize that I have done this and that
Mhm.
that we can be adult friends. But that is
Mhm.
a thing, like that's another letting go, is realizing that that is a growth thing that I am not responsible for
Yeah.
and that they have to do themselves. Um, and that letting go of it isn't letting them go.
Mm. Mm. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. Yeah.
But thank you also for being here, because I do feel like being able to hash this out with someone is
Mhm.
very, very helpful.
You've been listening to Conversations Along the Way, part of the Stoic Mom Project. If you're interested in connecting with other moms who are supporting each other to grow through the most difficult things life will throw at us, we invite you to consider joining us in the S&P Online Community Center. This is a private, vetted community created specifically for moms who share this circumstance. For more information and to express interest in joining, please visit the S&P Community Center tab at stoicmom.substack.com to learn more, or simply fill out the application included in the show notes of this episode. Thanks for listening, and hang in there, Mama. There's light at the end of this tunnel.